The rain had arrested just as Amara Johnson's flight descended into Atlanta. A thin, silver veil draped over the city, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. She loved rain, its honesty, its refusal to pretend the world was anything other than what it was. But tonight its music felt different, too soft, too fragile, too much like a warning. Her rideshare dropped her in front of the converted warehouse loft she and Ethan had restored together, brick by brick, vow by vow. The quiet street glistened under the streetlights, the puddles shimmering as if reflecting pieces of some other universe. Beautiful, yes, but distant, detached. She unlocked the door with the jittery excitement of someone returning home with good news. The contract is ours, she thought. Detroit chose our firm. We did it. Ethan would be proud, should be proud. He had always said her work would change the way America built its future. She wanted to see that belief in his eyes again. The loft greeted her with its usual warmth. Soft amber lights, the faint smell of sandalwood, the hum of the old industrial heater kicking on. Her suitcase wheels whispered across the polished concrete floor as she moved toward the hallway, eager to call his name, to say, "I'm home early. You won't believe what happened today." But then she stopped. A sound floated down the hallway, a soft, breathy sound that did not belong to the rain, or to the loft, or to any version of home she recognized. Amara stood still, the handle of her suitcase going slack in her grip. Her heartbeat, steady a moment ago, now stuttered like a skipped note in a love song. Another sound. A low exhale. A laugh. Light, intimate, far too close. Her breath caught. Not because she didn't understand what she heard, but because she did. Instantly. Completely. With the clarity of an engineer assessing a structural crack and knowing it's not superficial, it's catastrophic. The bedroom door was half closed, a sliver of warm, dim light spilling across the hallway floor. Shadows moved in the space beyond it, rhythmic, undeniable. The world tilted. Amara's hand rose instinctively to her mouth, not to silence a scream, but to hold in the sound of something breaking, something fragile and human in hers. She hadn't imagined this. She wasn't mistaken. The cadence behind that door was ancient, universal, and unmistakably intimate. And it was happening in the room where she and Ethan had whispered plans for the house they'd build one day, the kids they might raise, the places they'd travel when life slowed down. The room where she had once pressed her forehead to his and thanked whatever force had brought him into her world. She took a step back, then another, moving like a woman who feared that one wrong breath might cause the entire structure of her life to collapse around her. The suitcase slipped from her fingers and toppled onto its side with a muted thud. Inside, her presentation files and notebooks shifted, almost apologetically, unaware they were no longer the brightest part of her day. A voice emerged, his voice, Ethan's, low, coaxing, threaded with the kind of tenderness he had once saved for her alone. Something inside Amara steadied, not with strength, not yet, but with focus. She didn't rush toward the door, or shout, or demand answers. She simply stood there, spine straightening inch by inch, as if bracing herself against an unspoken storm. She had always believed that the end of a marriage would arrive like an explosion, loud, unmistakable, shattering everything at once. But this was quieter, crueler, a slow tear through the fabric of her story, unraveling stitch by careful stitch. The laughter behind the door rose again, bright and unburdened. Amara closed her eyes. The moment stretched, exquisite in its devastation, suspended in time like the pause between lightning and thunder. Then, slowly, she stepped away from the bedroom and into the living room, choosing silence over chaos, restraint over collapse. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is not interrupt the moment that breaks her. Sometimes she must witness it, fully, painfully, to understand exactly what she must become next. And though the betrayal carved through her like fire, something else flickered beneath it. the faintest glow of awakening, small but certain, a future not yet shaped, but entirely hers to reclaim. If this moment gripped you, if Amara's story resonates even a little, stay close. Like, comment, or follow the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of her rise, from heartbreak to something far more powerful. 4 years earlier, New Orleans smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. The city held its breath under a heavy, humid dusk, the air thick with jasmine and possibility. On the 11th floor of a hotel off Canal Street, the rooftop bar buzzed with a low hum of conversation. Academics, city planners, investors, all gathered for the annual summit on climate resilience. Amara Johnson stood at the edge of the terrace, fingers wrapped around a sweating glass of sparkling water, her conference badge swinging gently against her dress. Beyond the glass railing, the Mississippi curled in a lazy arc, its surface catching the last of the sun like a strip of molten bronze. She should have felt triumphant. Her presentation that afternoon on modular, flood-resilient housing for low-income communities had drawn a packed room. Questions, applause, a handshake from the keynote speaker. She'd even seen someone from the Department of Housing scribbling her name into a notebook. And yet, alone on the rooftop, surrounded by small clusters of people laughing over cocktails and canapes, she felt oddly suspended. The kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from standing dangerously close to the edge of something you can't yet name. She tilted her head back, letting the warm air settle over her skin, her curls lifting slightly in the wind. New Orleans was a city that understood loss and resilience in equal measure. Maybe that was why she felt so at home here. Structures could collapse, people could drown, entire neighborhoods could vanish beneath water, and still somehow there would be brass bands and second lines and the stubborn insistence on joy. Your graph on projected floodplains in Ward 9 was brutal. The voice came from her left, smooth, amused, threaded with a sincerity that made it hard to dismiss as casual flattery. Amara blinked, lowering her gaze. A man stood a few feet away, hands loosely in his pockets, the breeze teasing at the open collar of his white shirt. He was taller than she'd realized up close, all angles and pale freckles, and bright, assessing blue eyes. His conference badge read, Ethan Cole, founder, Cole Horizons Capital. Brutal, she repeated, one brow lifting. That's one word for it. I mean it as a compliment, he said quickly, a smile tugging at his mouth. Brutal in that way truth often is, especially when it ruins a perfectly good investment deck. She huffed a laugh before she could stop herself. Let me guess. You're one of the people whose pretty projections my data just torpedoed. Guilty, he admitted. Half the rooms shifted in their seats when you put up that map. The other half started calculating how much more it was going to cost to build the right way instead of the easy way. And which half are you in? She asked. He tilted his head, considering her with a seriousness that startled her. Depends, he said. Which half are you hoping I'm in? The answer was clever, but his tone wasn't glib. He was really asking. I'm hoping, Amara said slowly, that if you're investing in the future of coastal cities, you're more interested in them existing than simply returning a profit. Then tonight, Ethan replied, we're on the same side. He stepped closer, not crowding, but enough that she could smell his cologne. Clean, understated, something like cedar and rain. He gestured toward the river. It's strange, he murmured. I've looked at 1,000 risk models, hurricanes, sea level rise, insurance markets. But sitting in that room today, watching you talk about foundations and failure points, it was the first time it felt personal. Because you finally pictured real people living in those houses, Amara said. Because I pictured you designing them, he corrected. The words slipped between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples across the surface of the moment. Amara felt heat rise to her cheeks. An involuntary response she tried to hide by taking a sip of her drink. You did your homework, she said lightly. Most investors hear structural engineer and mentally replace it with person who makes walls stand up. Most investors are idiots, Ethan said. You're not just making walls stand up. You're designing whether a family has a second chance after a storm or not. That's different. He wasn't looking at her the way men at networking events often did, either past her, towards someone more powerful, or at her body as if it were another line on their asset sheet. His gaze was direct, attentive, and, annoyingly, felt like it saw more than she was prepared to offer. "You watched the whole talk?" she asked. "Twice," he said without missing a beat. "Once in person, once again online, last month, when I was deciding whether to come to this conference." That caught her off guard. "You chose a conference based on a panelist?" "I chose it based on a question," Ethan replied. "I wanted to know what the future of cities looks like if we stop pretending disaster is optional and start designing as if it's inevitable. Your work came up, more than once." He didn't say it with an air of flattery. He said it like a conclusion he'd drawn reluctantly and was now forced to accept. Something in Amara's chest loosened. "So you're just here to poach my ideas," she said, trying to bring levity back into the conversation. "I'm here," he said softly, "to see if we're solving the same problem from different angles. And if we are, what we could build together." Lightning flickered far off over the river, a silent flash tracing the edge of the clouds. The air tightened around them. The rooftop noise dimmed in Amara's mind. She was aware, vaguely, of the clink of glassware, the murmur of two planners arguing over zoning codes nearby, the strains of a trumpet from a distant street performer below. But all of it felt far away, as if she and this man had stepped into a quieter pocket of the world. "What do you build, Ethan Cole?" she asked, voice low. "Leverage," he answered. "Capital. Platforms. I move money where I believe the future is going. At least, that's what I tell my investors." "And what do you tell yourself?" Amara pressed. He smiled, but his eyes didn't dodge the question. "That I'm trying, in my own flawed, capitalist way, not to be on the wrong side of history." The honesty of it startled her more than some polished speech would have. It was imperfect, almost awkward, and somehow that made it feel more real. He angled his body toward hers, elbows resting on the railing, mirroring her stance without crowding her. "Tell me what you'd do," he said, "if money wasn't the first barrier. If you didn't have to compromise with city councils or developers who want cheap and pretty instead of strong and just." She laughed under her breath. "You don't have enough time for that answer." "I booked the red-eye back," Ethan replied. "Try me." So she told him about neighborhoods left to rot after storms because they weren't picturesque enough for recovery campaigns. About grandmothers living in mold-ridden houses because rebuilding grants were designed for people with lawyers, not for people with 3 jobs. About the way steel and concrete could be arranged not just to resist gravity, but to resist cruelty. He listened, and she watched him listening, really listening, not waiting for his turn to speak. His questions were sharp but never dismissive. When he disagreed, he asked why instead of explaining why she was wrong. Somewhere between her 4th and 5th rant about outdated building codes, she realized she was smiling. She hadn't come here looking for that. She hadn't come here looking for anything except professional connections and better data. But there, under the pregnant New Orleans sky, with the river glinting like a slow-moving secret and the city's old wounds humming quietly beneath their feet, something shifted. Not a lightning strike, not fireworks, just the gentle, undeniable sense of 2 trajectories bending toward each other. Later, Amara would replay this evening 100 times in her mind, searching for the precise second when admiration tipped into affection, when potential hardened into promise. She wouldn't be able to name it. All she would remember was this: the way he said her name for the first time, carefully, like he was aware it carried weight. "Amara," Ethan said, as the first drop of rain finally broke loose and landed cool against her forearm. "I'd really like to keep talking. Not just tonight, not just about work." She glanced at the sky, at the city that knew how to flood and still sing, then back at the man beside her who seemed, impossibly, to understand the language of her ambitions. "Then you'd better bring an umbrella," she replied. "Where I'm going, it rains a lot." He laughed, soft and full of something like wonder. He would follow. For a while, he would walk beside her, and for a time, too brief, too bright, that would feel like enough. In the months that followed their meeting in New Orleans, something like a gentle gravity began pulling Amara and Ethan into the same orbit. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, not the reckless kind that devours two people before they understand what they're becoming. No, theirs built slowly, the way cities rise, foundation first, then beams, then the careful layering of trust and tenderness. They dated long distance at first. Ethan in Atlanta, tethered to his fast-growing investment fund, Amara in Chicago, running site visits for a resilience pilot project. Their phone calls sometimes lasted until dawn. He would talk about investors who wanted flash instead of substance. She would talk about soil analyses and community meetings and the small triumphs that kept her pushing forward. What surprised her most was how he listened, how he remembered every detail, even the ones she tossed out casually. When she mentioned a grandmother in Baton Rouge fighting for grant approval to rebuild her storm-wrecked home, Ethan asked about her for weeks afterward, wanting updates, wanting solutions. By the time Amara accepted a position in Atlanta to co-found her own design firm, the long-distance ache had become unbearable. Ethan showed up on her new doorstep the night she arrived, hair tousled, tie undone, carrying a bottle of wine and a set of keys. "For whenever you feel like coming over," he said, shy in a way she hadn't seen before. She had taken the keys. She had taken his hand. And somewhere in that quiet exchange, something permanent clicked into place. Their early life together unfolded in a rhythm that felt both intentional and effortless. They spent Saturday mornings at the Freedom Farmers Market, arguing cheerfully over which seasonal vegetables they actually had time to cook. Ethan developed an unexpected obsession with Amara's spice cabinet, attempting curry recipes far more ambitious than his skill level warranted. Amara laughed until her stomach ached the night he accidentally set off the smoke alarm with a pan of scorched cardamom. They learned each other's habits the way architects learn the idiosyncrasies of an old building, gently, patiently, with reverence for the history beneath the surface. Amara discovered that Ethan slept lightly, waking at the slightest noise, but surrendered instantly when she rested her hand on his chest. Ethan learned that she hummed when she drafted, unconsciously, faintly, a low melodic thread that wove itself into the soundscape of their home. It was a life built not on grand gestures, but on accumulation. 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom, her hair products overflowing a shelf he cleared willingly, his socks in her laundry pile, notes tucked into each other's laptops before early meetings. And then there was the loft. They found it on a scorching July afternoon, a cavernous brick warehouse unit with exposed beams, cracked concrete floors, and windows tall enough to make even the sun feel small. It was raw, imperfect, echoing with the ghosts of past machinery. Amara stepped inside and felt her breath hitch, the way it always did when she saw hidden potential. "This place needs everything," Ethan said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "That's the point," she replied. They bought it together. Even now, remembering that time, she could still summon the scent of sawdust clinging to her skin, the sharp tang of metal shavings, the thrill of stripping the space down to its bones. She designed floating staircases and steel-reinforced shelving, a living room anchored by a salvaged wood beam. She and Ethan spent a weekend sanding by hand. He handled permits, contractors, budgets, moving through bureaucratic hurdles with the tenacity of someone who refused to let anything slow her vision. During the build, they argued over placement of the kitchen island, over whether the guest room needed a door, over the shade of charcoal paint that would frame the bedroom wall. But the arguments were warm, tinged with laughter, softened by the knowledge that this was their home, rising from the dust. On the night the final coat of paint dried, Ethan carried a mattress into the empty bedroom and tossed it onto the floor. "We don't need furniture yet," he said, pulling her into his arms. Just this, just us. They slept under the unfinished rafters, wrapped in each other in the thrilling certainty that they were creating not only a home, but a future. Under that vast ceiling, Ethan whispered, "Tell me what you want our life to look like in 10 years. She spoke of designing community centers across the South, of teaching future engineers, of maybe having children if their lives made space for that kind of nurturing. He told her he wanted to build a fund that lifted cities instead of extracting from them. And he told her he wanted her beside him through all of it, not as an accessory to his ambition, but as its compass. In that moment, Amara believed him completely. The years that followed seemed to justify that faith. Their companies grew. Their love deepened. Their loft filled with plants, books, unfinished drafts, and laughter. They hosted dinner parties where artists sat beside venture capitalists and neighborhood activists. And somehow the conversations always ended with someone drawing diagrams on napkins. They talked often of marriage, neither rushing nor hesitating, just trusting that the foundation was already there and the rest would follow. When Ethan finally knelt beside her at the edge of the beltline, offering a ring shaped like a rising sun, Amara didn't cry. She simply said yes, with a certainty that settled into her bones like truth. For a time, too brief but brilliant, their life together felt like a blueprint, flawlessly executed, a structure that could withstand anything, a future that looked unshakable. But even the strongest foundations can hide fractures, and some storms begin long before the first drop of rain touches the ground. The first crack appeared so subtly that, at the time, Amara mistook it for the ordinary settling of a marriage, like the faint shift of beams in a newly built house. Nothing more than wood adjusting to its own weight. It happened one autumn evening, the kind of evening that used to belong to them. Ethan arrived home late, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, carrying the scent of cold air and stress. Amara had cooked, an act she rarely indulged in, mostly because he loved it when she did. The table was set, candles softened the edges of the room, jazz hummed low from the speakers. She'd even worn the gold hoops he once said made her look like the sun stepping into the room. He paused in the doorway, blinking as if surprised to find her there. "You're home early," he said, although it was well past 8. "And you're home late," Amara smiled, trying to keep it light. "Rough day?" He kissed her cheek instead of her lips. Long day. They ate in halting conversation, her asking small questions, him giving smaller answers. Later, he fell asleep on the couch with his phone loosely tucked beneath his hand, notifications flashing every few minutes. She draped a blanket over him and told herself it was temporary. Everyone went through seasons of exhaustion. This too would pass. It did not. Winter brought further strain, the kind that didn't shout but whispered, longer nights at the office, missed dinners, canceled plans. Ethan's fund was expanding aggressively. New York investors wanted him on weekly calls. West Coast partners pushed for weekend strategy sessions. He kept saying yes. He kept running. Amara, who understood stress intimately, tried to create a haven for him at home. She left his favorite snacks in the pantry, sent encouraging texts during his meetings, massaged the tension from his shoulders when he finally collapsed beside her in bed. But even in her arms, he felt distant, like someone she knew only through a memory. One night, she found him sitting awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the city lights through their bedroom window. "You okay?" she murmured, sliding beside him. He exhaled, long and weary. "I need this quarter to go right. Everything depends on it." "You don't have to hold the entire future alone, Ethan." He nodded, but the words didn't seem to reach him. He didn't say thank you. He didn't lean into her touch. Instead, he kissed her forehead, absent-mindedly, and returned to his laptop. She lay back, staring at the ceiling beams she had once sanded with him, feeling something inside her chest loosen into unease. By spring, their schedules had become parallel lines, close but never meeting. Ethan left before sunrise, returning well after dark. Their text threads filled with logistical fragments instead of affection. "Running late. Don't wait up. Investor dinner ran long. Flight delayed again. Amara understood the pressures of ambition. She'd lived them herself, but ambition had never taken her from him. If anything, her work had always made her rush home to share the victories, the failures, the stories. Now she arrived home, excited about a prototype she'd perfected, or a municipal contract her firm was shortlisted for, only to find the loft dark and silent. Her joy dissolved into the air like steam that never coalesced. She tried to believe this was simply a chapter. Uncomfortable, yes, but transitional. Even so, a quiet fear began to unfurl within her. The second crack came during a Saturday that should have belonged wholly to them. Ethan had promised to take the day off. They were supposed to go to Piedmont Park, maybe bike the trails, maybe do nothing at all except be together. Something that had become too rare. Amara waited in the kitchen, sipping coffee, listening for his footsteps. They never came. At 11, he emerged from the office wearing a suit jacket and distracted apology. "Just 2 hours," he said, grabbing his keys. "I swear, 2 hours became 7. When he finally returned, the sun had dipped below the skyline. His tie was loosened, his expression worn, and he greeted her with a hurried kiss, followed by the familiar refrain. It was unavoidable. Something in her chest tightened. A small, trembling voice inside whispered, "You're losing him." She silenced it. Love, she told herself firmly, required patience, flexibility, faith. But faith without reciprocity begins to resemble delusion. The third crack didn't come from Ethan at all. It came from Amara herself. Late one evening, after a 16-hour day at her firm, she stopped by a neighborhood bar for a drink. The bartender, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes, complimented her presentation from a recent panel. They exchanged a few harmless words. When he asked if she was married, she said, "Yes," without hesitation. But the hesitation came afterward. Not doubt, not temptation, just a sudden, sharp loneliness. The realization startled her so completely that she left the bar after only a few minutes. She walked home through the cool night, her footsteps too loud on the empty sidewalk. How long had it been since she felt romantic partnership, not just marital obligation? How long since Ethan had touched her with attention instead of autopilot? She unlocked the loft, stepped inside, and found it dark again. Ethan was out of town. She stood in the doorway, hugging her coat around herself, thinking, "I miss a man who is still my husband, a man who is still alive, still here, yet somehow feels already gone." That was the moment she admitted, if only to herself, that something had shifted. No affair she knew of, no evidence of betrayal, just distance, quiet, creeping, corrosive. A hairline crack along the foundation, one that would widen, one that would eventually splinter everything. And though she couldn't see the collapse coming, she could feel the faint, unmistakable tremor of it under her feet. On her first day at Cole Horizons, Lena Morales wore the only blazer she owned and a pair of heels that hurt before she even left her apartment. Atlanta rose around her in glass and steel, a city of mirrored facades and quiet ambitions, and she felt very small walking into the lobby of the fund that had taken a chance on her resume. She had grown up navigating tight spaces, crowded apartments, crowded bus routes, crowded schedules, always stretching every dollar and every hour a little further than it wanted to go. Nothing about her background said she should end up here. A Latina from a working-class family now strategizing digital narratives for a firm that moved millions with a few keystrokes and a well-timed call. Maybe that was why she was so determined to be good, to be indispensable, to be seen. Ethan noticed her in the second week, not in the way men had noticed her at other companies, lingering looks, jokes that landed too close to her body. Instead, he stopped at her desk with a printout of a campaign analysis she'd put together and said, quietly and directly, "This is smarter than what we've been doing." She almost laughed, certain she'd misheard. "You read the whole deck?" "I read everything with my name on it," he replied, "and your name should be on more of it." His praise wasn't effusive, it was precise. It landed somewhere deeper than flattery, in a place that had always been slightly hungry. After that, he started inviting her to more meetings. Investor calls, branding discussions, pitch rehearsals. He never hovered or made a show of it. He just acted as if her presence there were obvious, expected, necessary. And slowly, dangerously, it began to feel that way to her too. The first late night wasn't unusual. A European investor wanted to rework a deck before morning. Ethan asked if Lena could stay and help. The office emptied out in waves. Analysts, associates, finance leads, until only the cleaning staff remained, moving like quiet ghosts through the glass-walled halls. They sat side by side in the conference room, the city a glittering sprawl beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lena's laptop glowed between them, a constellation of charts and bullet points. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said eventually, leaning back in his chair. She glanced up. "Is that a test?" "Consider it qualitative research," he said, a half-smile tugging at his mouth. "Why did you say yes? To this job, I mean. There are a dozen agencies that would have killed to have you full-time." She shrugged, then immediately felt the gesture was too casual for the truth. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her bracelet. "Because here," she said slowly, "the stories I helped shape might actually change something physical. A bridge, a neighborhood, a waterfront. I spent too long telling people to buy shoes and energy drinks. I wanted wait." "Wait," he repeated, testing the word. "That's a rare thing to crave." "Not really," she answered. "Most people want to matter. They just settle for being seen." He was quiet for a moment. When she glanced over, his gaze was fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "You know," he said, "you might be the only person in this building who understands why I started this fund." She snorted lightly. "You started it to make money." "Eventually," he conceded. "But in the beginning, it was supposed to be about directing capital toward the future instead of the past. About backing the people who saw storms coming before everyone else did." He paused. "People like you." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air warmer. Lena swallowed, acutely aware of the line running invisibly between them. She changed the subject, tilting the laptop so they could both see. "The slide on community impact is weak. We keep using stock imagery of smiling kids. But where's the actual impact? The metrics, the names?" He leaned in, shoulder brushing hers, eyes on the screen. "Show me what it should look like." She did. They worked until nearly 2 in the morning, rewriting copy, repositioning graphs, cutting anything that felt hollow. When they finally stood to leave, Lena almost stumbled. She hadn't realized how stiff her body had become. "Hey," Ethan said softly, fingers grazing her elbow to steady her. Heat flared where he touched her. "We're not doing this again. The all-nighters, I mean. I don't want you burning out because I can't say no to a client." "Burnout is a luxury," she said lightly. "My mother says if you're tired, it means you're doing something worth staying awake for." He smiled at that, but there was a sadness behind it. "Your mother sounds formidable." "She'd eat you alive," Lena replied, and they laughed together, the sound echoing down the empty hallway. On the drive home, the city smeared past in streaks of red and white light. She caught herself replaying little fragments of the night, the way he'd listened without interrupting, the way he'd said, "people like you," as if she belonged in the same category as founders and visionaries and architects of the future. It wasn't attraction, she told herself. It was admiration, gratitude, the fragile beginnings of mentorship. She didn't let herself consider that those things, left unchecked, could bend into something else. The first time she saw a photo of Amara, it knocked the breath from her chest. She wasn't snooping. The picture sat in plain sight on Ethan's desk. A Polaroid of a woman standing on a construction site, hard hat tipped back, curls tucked into a scarf, brown skin luminous against a sky full of cranes. She was laughing at something out of frame, mouth wide, eyes brilliant. Lena felt her stomach twist, not with jealousy, but with an odd sense of recognition. Here, in a small white frame, was the kind of woman she wanted to grow into. grounded, unafraid, wholly herself.
"She's an engineer," Ethan said later, when Lena finally worked up the courage to ask. His voice softened in a way Lena had never heard. She sees the world in load-bearing lines and wind patterns, and somehow she still remembers that buildings are for people, not just for profit. The admiration in his eyes was unmistakable. So was the distance. Lena noticed how his gaze slid away from the photo too quickly afterward, how he changed the subject, how his wedding ring spun more often around his finger in meetings where Amara's name came up. The rational part of her brain, sharp, ethical, trained on boundaries, saw all of this and drew a clear conclusion. This man is married. He is not yours to save. Step back now while you still can. But another part of her, the one that had climbed every ladder offered, because none were guaranteed, whispered different words. He's unhappy. He's alone even when he isn't. You understand him in ways she might not anymore. Lena didn't know which story was true. Perhaps neither, perhaps both. What she did know, with increasing dread, was that the line between admiration and desire was thinning, that his laughter had begun to feel like a reward, that the nights she worked late with him left her both exhilarated and aching, and somewhere deep down, despite all the reasons she knew better, a quiet, treacherous thought took root. Maybe this is the start of my story. She did not yet understand that for someone else, it would be the beginning of an ending. The loft was so still it felt staged, as if someone had taken their life, emptied it of motion and sound, and left only the outline behind. After the laughter fell away, after the soft murmur of voices blurred into something indistinct, the bedroom door opened with a small click. Amara, standing in the shadowed alcove off the hallway, watched the wedge of light spill across the polished concrete, stretching toward her like an accusation. She did not move. A woman stepped out first. Lena's hair was mussed, her blouse hastily tucked in, lipstick smudged at the corner of her mouth. She held her heels in one hand, the other smoothing her skirt in an unconscious attempt at composure. Her face was turned away from Amara, but Amara could see the outline of her profile, the curve of a cheek she recognized from the photo on Ethan's desk. The sight of her there, barefoot in Amara's home, in the softened intimacy of after, slid like a blade between ribs. Still, Amara stayed hidden, pressed against the cool wall, every muscle held in a deliberate, shaking restraint. Ethan followed, shirt untucked, hair disordered, the top buttons open. There was a softness to his expression, the relaxed, unguarded look of a man temporarily freed from the weight he'd been carrying. He reached for Lena's wrist, brushed his thumb over the inside of it, and said something low that Amara couldn't hear. Lena hesitated at the front door. "Are you sure?" she murmured, voice barely more than air. "You said she doesn't get back until tomorrow." "She doesn't," Ethan replied without pause. "You're fine." The lie slid into the air between them and floated down the hallway to where Amara stood alone in the dark. A part of her wanted to step out then, to let the truth collide with his assurance like glass meeting concrete. But another part, the part that had designed load-bearing systems, calculated failure points, learned how structures collapsed, told her to wait. Sometimes you needed to see the full extent of the damage before you could decide whether to repair or demolish. The door opened. Night air swept in, cool and damp. Lena slipped out. The door closed with a softness that felt obscene. Silence washed back in. Amara stayed where she was, listening to the sounds she knew so well. The faint hum of the fridge, the pulse of traffic outside, the echo of Ethan's footsteps moving through the space they had built together. He moved into the kitchen. A cabinet opened, the clink of glass, the rush of water from the tap. Her heart beat a steady, unnatural rhythm in her ears, no longer synced to anything in the room. When she finally stepped out from the shadows, she did it without rehearsal, without drama, simply putting one foot in front of the other, crossing the hall as if she were walking into any ordinary evening. "Ethan." Her voice carried across the loft, clear and level. He jumped slightly, the glass in his hand tilting. Water splashed onto the counter. He turned. For a second, just one, suspended and luminous, his face was unmasked. Shock, guilt, disbelief chased one another across his features in a frantic procession. Then the practiced composure slid back into place, the familiar half-smile curving his mouth. "Amara," he said, as if her name were a question. "I thought you weren't back until tomorrow." "I took an earlier flight." She removed her coat with steady hands, draped it over the back of a stool, each gesture measured. The ordinary act of hanging fabric felt like laying bricks in a wall she was hurriedly building between herself and the wreckage. "How was the trip?" he asked. It was absurd, the question, floating between them like a balloon at a funeral. "We won the contract," she answered. "It was a big day." "That's incredible," he said automatically, stepping forward as if to embrace her. "I'm proud of—" She stepped back. The movement was small, but it changed the air. Ethan froze, mid-reach, his arms falling awkwardly to his sides. For the first time, he seemed to really look at her. Her hair still carried the faint scent of recycled plein air. There was a crease on her blouse from the seatbelt. Her eyes were calm, too calm. "You're home early," he said again, softer now. "What time did you get in?" "Around 4:30, color drained from his face. Just a shade, but she caught it. She had spent years reading the stress patterns of steel, the fine hairline fractures that warned of structural failure. This was no different. "How?" His throat worked. "How long have you been here?" She let the question hang, like an exposed beam. "Long enough," she said. Her voice was no longer neutral. It carried a fine edge now, a thread of sound that hummed with something between grief and fury. He inhaled sharply. "Amara, it's not what you think." She laughed then, a short, broken sound that startled even her. "You're going to start with that?" He flinched. She moved past him, her gaze sweeping the room, not in search of evidence, because she didn't need any, but in a final act of farewell to the version of this space she had loved. The couch where they had fallen asleep watching documentaries. The kitchen island where they'd rolled out dough for the empanadas his mother had taught her to make. The hallway where she had once twirled in a new dress, his applause loud and delighted. All of it was still here. All of it was permanently altered. She turned back to him. "I heard you," she said quietly, "in our bedroom, with her." The words were simple, but the way she placed them, precise, unadorned, left no room for denial. His shoulders slumped. The last of his defenses seemed to melt away, leaving something smaller, more desperate. "Amara, how long?" she asked. His eyes flickered toward the floor. "It doesn't matter. It was a mistake. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking. And it just—" "How long?" she repeated, each syllable carefully measured. An engineer's question. A woman's demand. He exhaled. "A few months." The lie was reflexive. She saw it immediately. Ethan had never been talented at half-truths. His integrity, once, had been what drew her to him. "In the office," she said. "In hotels. In our home." His jaw tightened. "I'm not going to stand here and be interrogated like a criminal." She tilted her head, studying him. "You're right," she murmured. "Criminals usually have better excuses." He winced. Silence stretched between them, thick as wet concrete. He tried again, voice low and urgent. "It doesn't mean I don't love you. You've been so focused on your work. I've been under pressure. We've barely seen each other. It just—" "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't you dare build your betrayal on the back of my ambition." The words landed between them like a fault line. "I have defended you," Amara continued, her composure thinning now, emotion threading through. "I have sat alone in this loft more nights than I can count, telling myself you were doing all of this for us, that the distance was temporary, that the man I married was still here somewhere under all that stress." Tears burned, but did not fall. Her voice softened, becoming almost eerily gentle. "Tell me, Ethan, when you brought her here, when you kissed her in my bed, did you think about me at all?" His lips parted. No sound came. She nodded once, as if that silence were answer enough. For a moment, he looked like he might reach for her again, but whatever courage or arrogance that would have required seemed to die in his eyes. Instead, he said in a low, hoarse tone, "Maybe we need time, space, to figure out what we both want." There it was, the language of detachment, dressed up as maturity. She felt something inside her shift. Not break exactly, realign. "I know what I want," Amara said. "I want you out. Tonight." He stared at her, stunned. "This is my home, too." "No," she replied, calm returning, smoothing over the cracks in her voice. "This is the house we built together. You turned it into a stage for your lies. Pack a bag and leave, Ethan." "You're being unreasonable." She almost smiled at that. "You set our life on fire," she said softly. "I am merely asking you to step outside and watch it burn from a safe distance." He opened his mouth to argue, to plead. She would never know. But the look in her eyes stopped him. There are moments in every life when a person realizes they have underestimated the strength of someone they loved. Ethan was standing in such a moment now, faced not with the version of Amara who smoothed his worry and softened his days, but with the version who had designed structures to outlast hurricanes. He packed a bag. He moved through the loft with hurried, disjointed motions, avoiding her gaze. She didn't follow, didn't hover, didn't ask where he would go. When he reached the door, hand on the knob, he hesitated. "Amara," he said without turning, "we can fix this." She looked at the man she had loved, the man who had once stood beside her under a New Orleans sky and promised to choose her future, again and again. "No," she said quietly, "we can't, but I can fix what comes after." He left. The door shut with more force this time. The sound rang through the loft, bounced off steel and glass in memory, and then faded into a hollow silence. Only then Amara sat down on the cool floor, her back against the wall, knees drawn to her chest. The tears came slowly, not in a flood, but in measured drops, like water finding the path of least resistance through a fractured foundation. She wept for the woman she had been that morning, walking through an airport with good news and an open heart, believing home was a place of safety. She wept for the future she'd mapped out in careful lines and thoughtful curves, the one that now lay in ruins at her feet. And beneath the grief, beneath the humiliation, something else stirred, a thin, bright line of resolve, running unbroken beneath the rubble. The detonation had happened. The structure of her marriage was gone. But the woman who stepped out of these ruins would be built on different terms. Morning found Amara on the couch, not quite sleeping, not quite waking, existing in that thin gray border where the mind refuses to accept what the body already knows. The loft felt different even before she opened her eyes, emptier somehow, as if the air itself had been scraped clean of something vital and toxic in the same breath. Ethan's absence was a hollow shape in the room. No keys tossed on the counter, no hurried footsteps, no scent of his cologne mingling with coffee. For years, she had oriented herself around those small rituals. Now there was only silence, and the low hum of the refrigerator working steadily in the corner. She lay still for a long time, watching light creep across the ceiling. Grief moved through her in quiet waves, still too stunned to crest as full sobbing. Each breath felt like lifting something heavy. Then, somewhere between one inhale and the next, a new thought cut through the haze. I will not let him walk away from this as if it were a bad quarter. The idea startled her with its sharpness. It steadied her too. Amara pushed herself upright. Her body ached as if she'd been in an accident rather than a conversation. She went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and studied her reflection. Her eyes were swollen, the kind of red that didn't disappear with makeup. There were faint creases in her cheeks where tears had dried. But beneath the signs of damage, something else emerged. A hardness at the jawline, a new precision in her gaze. This is the part, she told the woman in the mirror quietly, where you decide who you're going to be on the other side of this. Her phone lay face down on the counter. When she turned it over, the screen lit up with a constellation of notifications. Ethan, her mother, Naomi, missed calls, messages. Fragments of concern and explanation waited behind each icon. She ignored them all. Instead, she opened a browser, typed in a name she had heard once in a whispered conversation at a gala, and pressed call. Veronica Hayes's office was in a tower of glass that caught the midday sun and fractured it into sharp, brilliant shards. The lobby smelled faintly of leather and citrus. The receptionist greeted Amara with the polite efficiency reserved for people whose lives were about to be cataloged in binders. Veronica arrived exactly on time. She was in her 50s, with close-cropped silver hair, dark skin like polished mahogany, and eyes that missed nothing. Her suit was the color of midnight ink. Her jewelry was minimal, save for a single ring shaped like an unbroken circle. "Miss Johnson," she said, extending a hand, "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "Amara," she replied, taking the hand. Veronica's grip was firm, grounding. She was led into a conference room overlooking the city, the skyline etched against a cloudless blue. On the table lay a legal pad, a fountain pen, and a glass of water already poured. "Tell me," Veronica said, settling into her chair, "what happened? Start at the beginning of the end." The phrase caught Amara off guard. The beginning of the end. She exhaled slowly. "I came home early yesterday," she began, "from a presentation. I wanted to surprise my husband." The story flowed out then, at first haltingly, then with increasing clarity. The sounds behind the door, the woman she recognized from the photograph, the conversation in the kitchen, the admissions, the way he had said, "We need space," as if he hadn't already taken it, with someone else's body. Veronica listened without interruption. No sympathetic gasps, no murmured reassurances. Only the occasional note, the scratch of pen on paper, the slight tightening at the corner of her mouth when Amara described certain phrases. When Amara finished, the room felt strangely quiet, as if the story itself had absorbed some of the air. "How long have you been married?" Veronica asked. 3 years. Together almost 5. "Children?" Amara shook her head. Their almost conversations about it felt like ghosts hovering in the silence. "Assets?" "Joint ownership of the loft," Amara replied. "We bought it together, but I did most of the design and renovation. I co-own a design firm. Ethan's fund, Cole Horizons, is large." A muscle flickered in Veronica's cheek. "Is your name on any of his business documents?" "No," Amara said, "but I hosted investor dinners. I traveled with him for some of the early rounds. I made our life possible so he could build his." The last words came out sharper than she intended. Veronica's gaze warmed almost imperceptibly. "Good," she said. Amara blinked. "Good? Good that you understand your own value," Veronica clarified. "Many people come in here ready to negotiate themselves down before they've even started. You are not one of those people. That will make my job easier." A faint, unsteady laugh slipped out of Amara. It felt strange, like stretching muscles that had forgotten they could move. "What do you want?" Veronica asked then. "Not what you think you're allowed to want. Not what you think a judge might find reasonable. What do you want from this divorce?" Amara stared at the city for a moment. Cars moved like tiny beads along the highway. A crane swung slowly at a construction site in the distance. "I want," she hesitated, tasting the words before committing to them. "I want him to feel the consequences," she said at last. "I want him to understand that he can't dismantle our life like a bad investment and walk away largely intact. I want enough of what we built together that I am not left rebuilding on scraps while he pretends this was a mutual decision." Veronica's eyes glinted. "And emotionally?" she asked, softer now. "What do you want for yourself?" "I want to stop feeling like I'm the one who failed," Amara whispered. "Like I should have seen it sooner. Like if I just loved him better, or been less busy, or been smaller somehow, this wouldn't have happened." Silence followed those words, not empty but full of something formidable. "Let me be unequivocally clear," Veronica said, leaning forward.
The story you just told me is one of betrayal, not mutual drift. You are not on trial here. You are here to claim what you are owed. Financially, yes, but also narratively. Do you understand? Amara nodded, though her throat felt too tight for speech. Good, Veronica continued. Here is what we will do. She outlined it with the efficiency of someone drafting a battle plan. Immediate filing, documentation of joint assets, forensic accounting if necessary. She asked for statements, tax returns, company overviews, any evidence of Ethan using marital funds for his affair. Receipts, hotel charges, flights that don't line up with business trips, she said. Anything that tells the story he will be too ashamed to say out loud. Amara listened, mind shifting gears. This was a language she understood. Evidence, structure, sequence. Veronica slid a blank notepad toward her. I want you to go home, the lawyer said, and treat this like a project. You're an engineer. You know how to deconstruct a failure so it doesn't replicate. Start with the last 6 months. Pull every statement you have access to. Print them. Highlight anything that raises questions. We will assemble it piece by piece. Something hot surged in Amara's chest then. Not grief, not even pain. Rage. Not the explosive, chaotic kind she'd seen in movies. This was a slow, rising heat. Thick and steady, moving through her veins like molten metal. Rage at his carelessness. Rage at his entitlement. Rage at the way he had already begun, in their argument, to rewrite the narrative so that her dedication to her work became the reason he had strayed. Veronica saw it. Her gaze softened for the first time. Let yourself be angry, she said quietly. Anger, when harnessed, is a very clean fuel. We won't live in it forever, but right now it will get you through the parts that would break you if you insisted on being only gracious. Amara closed her eyes, just for a moment, letting that permission wash over her. When she opened them, the city outside looked different. Not kinder, not safer, but navigable. She signed the retainer. As she left the office, stepping back into the sun-struck corridor, she felt the first real line of separation form between past and future. Last night she had lost a husband. Today, she had gained something else, a weapon, a strategy, and, for the first time since the bedroom door opened, a sense that she was not simply surviving a story. She was rewriting it. The news did not explode outward in some dramatic public spectacle. It seeped instead into the corners of Amara's life like a slow-moving leak, silent at first, then impossible to ignore, she told her mother on a Sunday. The call connected to the familiar background sounds of home. A TV murmuring in the other room, a pot simmering on the stove, the rustle of pages from the church bulletin her mother always read twice. Amara almost hung up. The words lodged behind her teeth felt too sharp for a house that had always smelled of cornbread and unconditional love. Baby, her mother said, I was just about to call you. Pastor mentioned your firm in the sermon, something about building foundations that hold. You know, I nearly stood up and shouted, That's my child. Amara closed her eyes. The irony twisted, but she found her voice. Ma. Something in her tone made the older woman instantly alert. What's wrong? Amara had thought she might ease into it, place soft padding around the truth. But when she finally spoke, the words came out clean and spare. Ethan cheated on me, she said, for months. I found out this week. I've hired a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. On the other end, silence. Not empty, thick, crowded with 1,000 unspoken prayers and fears. When her mother finally spoke, her voice was small in a way Amara had never heard. No, she whispered. No, that boy loves you. He wouldn't. Are you sure? Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. People talk, you know how the enemy. I heard him, Amara said gently but firmly. In our home, with her, there is no misunderstanding. Another pause. Then the tone shifted, the softness sharpening into something older, fiercer. That fool, her mother breathed.
That ungrateful, foolish boy. A pot boiled over in the background. She didn't move to catch it. You listen to me, Amara Louise Johnson. You are not to sit there and wonder what you did wrong. You hear? You are not going to starve yourself or shrink yourself to make sense of his sin. Tears welled, slid hot and silent down Amara's cheeks. I don't feel like shrinking, she whispered. I feel angry. Good, her mother said, surprising her. You hold on to that. I'll be on the next flight. You don't have to. I said, her mother repeated, voice brooking no argument, I'll be on the next flight. The call ended with promises in scripture and the rustle of hastily packed luggage. When Amara set the phone down, her hands shook, not from pain, but from the relief of having said the words out loud to someone who loved her before they loved her husband. Her brother reacted exactly as she'd expected. Derek drove over that night, knocking on her door with more force than necessary. When she opened it, he pulled her into a hug that felt like a shield. Broad shoulders, familiar hoodie, the faint smell of motor oil and cheap cologne. Tell me where he is, he said, leaning back to look at her. I'm not asking if, I'm asking where. I will not actually kill him, but I'm not above making him slightly nervous about his life choices. Despite everything, a laugh broke free, sharp and unexpected. I don't know where he is. The club maybe? A hotel? Her place? Does it matter? It matters to my conscience, Derek muttered, but his gaze sifted over her face, cataloging the tiredness there. He sobered. You sure about the divorce? Yes. He nodded once. No sermon, no hesitation. Then we ride with you, all the way through. You want me at the hearings, I'm there. You want me to pick up Ma from the airport? I'm there. You want me to carry all his stuff out and leave it on the curb? That part is already done, she said quietly. I told him to leave. He did. In that case, Derek said, I'll be over here putting together every IKEA thing you ever buy, so you never have to ask a man with a fragile ego to assemble a bookshelf again. It was ridiculous. It was also, in a strange way, exactly what she needed. Telling Naomi was harder. Naomi wasn't just her best friend. She was her partner in the firm, the person who had stood beside her as they signed their first lease and celebrated their first contract. Their lives were entwined, not only emotionally, but professionally. Any rupture in Amara's personal life threatened to send tremors through the business they had built together. They met at their usual cafe, at a corner table near the window. Naomi arrived in a rust-colored suit with her curls piled high, and her eyes already narrowed in concern. All right, she said, sitting down. You texted, we need to talk, with a period. That's either a new project, a death, or man trouble. Combination of the last two, Amara said. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Naomi's face changed as she put it together, horror dawning. No, she breathed. Not Ethan, Amara nodded. Oh my God. Naomi reached across the table, grabbed her hand, squeezed so hard it almost hurt. Tell me everything, and don't you dare soften it for my sake. So she told her. Not the intimate details, but enough. Enough for Naomi to understand that this wasn't a mistake, not some drunken kiss at a Christmas party, but a sustained campaign of deception that had taken place in the very home she'd helped Amara design. Naomi's eyes went dark and flat. I never liked his hair, she said finally. Always thought it was too neat. Amara snorted, then clapped a hand over her mouth. That's the critique you're going with? Oh, I have more, Naomi said, but half of them are unprintable, and the other half involves suggestions for what he can do with his spreadsheets. The humor was a thin cover over something far more serious. After a moment, Naomi squeezed her hand again. Work is covered, she said. If you need days off, take them. If you need to come in and pretend everything's fine, do that too. I'll handle whatever you can't. But don't you hide this from me because you think it will make things awkward. You and I are not negotiable. Warmth spread through Amara's chest. Not the consuming heat of rage, but a quieter, sustaining glow. "People are going to talk," she murmured. "Clients, colleagues, this city thrives on gossip." "Let them," Naomi said coolly. "We do good work. We have receipts. You're the woman rebuilding half their infrastructure. If anyone wants to sideline you because your husband couldn't keep his vows, that's a reflection of their character, not yours." Amara looked out the window. Outside, a couple walked past, laughing, linked at the elbows. Once she would have seen them and thought of herself and Ethan. Now they look like strangers from a different planet. "Do you think people will choose?" she asked softly. "Between us and him?" "They will try," Naomi said. "Some already have. I got an email this morning from a client who said, 'I heard there may be some instability in your partner's personal life. Should we be worried?'" The words landed like a slap. "Already?" Naomi's smile turned sharp. I wrote back, "The only instability you need to worry about is what happens to your poorly built retaining walls when the next storm hits. Our work is solid. Thank you for your concern." Despite herself, Amara laughed. It tasted like salt and relief. The broader circle reacted predictably, if painfully. Some friends sent messages that began with, "I'm so sorry," and ended with, "He always seemed so devoted though." Their confusion clung to her skin like a film, as if Ethan's performance had been so convincing that her pain now disrupted their understanding of him more than it concerned them for her. Others reached out in quieter, more meaningful ways. A former colleague left a bouquet of wildflowers on her doorstep with a note that read, "Storms reveal which structures were never sound to begin with. You're still standing." At church, the news traveled quickly. The first Sunday she returned after filing, Amara felt the weight of eyes on her as she walked down the aisle to the same pew she and Ethan had once shared. Some looks were full of warmth, some of pity, a few tinged with subtle judgment she could almost hear. What happened? Who failed? After the service, the pastor approached her gently. "Amara," he said, "we heard about what's happening. I won't pretend to know the full story, and I won't offer you cliches. But I will tell you this. There is no virtue in staying bound to someone who has broken covenant without repentance." She nodded, throat too tight to answer. He rested a hand briefly on her shoulder, a light, respectful weight, then moved on. Outside on the steps, two women she barely knew approached her with the stiff sympathy people reserve for those who carry visible scars. "Men," one of them said, with a rueful shake of her head. "Always wandering." Amara felt something cold settle in her chest. "No," she said quietly, "not always. I won't let his choices become a prophecy over every man or every marriage I know." The woman blinked, taken aback. Then she nodded once, more thoughtfully. "You're right," she said. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair." Reputation, Amara realized, wasn't just what people said about you. It was the story they tried to weave around your life to make sense of their own fears. If she wasn't careful, she could drown in versions of herself she didn't recognize. The tragic abandoned wife, the too ambitious woman whose career cost her husband, the cold professional who chose money over forgiveness. She did not intend to be any of those things. She could not control the whispers in boardrooms or group chats. She couldn't stop investors from wondering whether her personal turmoil would affect her performance. She couldn't keep mutual acquaintances from inviting Ethan to events and forgetting to include her. What she could do, what she resolved to do, was this: show up to her own life with such unmistakable clarity that anyone who tried to reduce her to a cautionary tale would have to work very hard to ignore the evidence. In the weeks that followed, as gossip looped and re-looped through the city like a persistent storm system, Amara kept moving. She attended client meetings. She stood on construction sites. She answered her mother's prayers with weary smiles and her brother's jokes with eye rolls and gratitude. At night, alone in the loft that still smelled faintly of Ethan's cologne, she let herself grieve. But in the daylight, she carried herself with a posture that said, "Yes, this happened. No,
It will not define the totality of who I am. The world had reacted. Now it was her turn to respond. Not with explanations, but with the unflinching act of continuing. Ethan had imagined, in some foolish, privileged corner of his mind, that the aftermath would be quiet, that Amara would fall apart privately, that her silence would soften the fracture, that his life could continue, altered, yes, but manageable. Instead, the consequences arrived like aftershocks. The first one hit in his office. He walked into the weekly partner meeting expecting business as usual. What greeted him instead was a room that felt colder than the air conditioning could justify. Conversations flattened when he entered. A few partners exchanged glances. One cleared his throat too loudly. Ethan took his seat, ignored the tension, and opened his laptop. The managing director, a broad-shouldered man named Carter Wallace, watched him for a beat before saying, "We should address the elephant in the room." Ethan kept his expression neutral, though a pulse of annoyance flickered beneath his skin. "If there's a business issue, say it. Otherwise, let's stick to the agenda." Carter arched a brow. "Personal matters bleed into business, Ethan, especially at this level." The words hung between them, heavy as an indictment. Ethan felt the back of his neck tighten. "My personal life is not a topic for this table." "Normally, yes," Carter said, "but when two investors reach out in the same morning asking whether recent instability in leadership could affect fund performance, it becomes relevant." A flush crept up Ethan's neck. He hated how quickly people moved, how private truths traveled through boardrooms faster than financial reports. "It will not affect anything," he said, jaw tight. "I'm handling it." "You'd better," Carter replied softly, "because investors hate uncertainty almost as much as they hate scandal." It was the closest thing to a reprimand Ethan had ever received. The meeting moved on, but the ground beneath him felt subtly shifted. A hairline crack in his authority. The second aftershock came from Lena. She had texted twice since that night. Light messages, cautious, asking if he was okay. He replied late, vaguely, without warmth. Guilt had dulled his responses, but so had something else. The realization that what he had done was not the passionate escape he told himself it was, but a choice made from fear and ego. When she appeared at his office door one afternoon, hesitation written in the stiff line of her shoulders, Ethan braced himself. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. He nodded, motioning for her to sit. She didn't. She closed the door behind her, arms folded protectively across her chest. Her voice was careful. "I heard you moved out of the loft. A temporary situation," he said, "until things settle." She studied him with a mixture of concern and dawning comprehension. "I didn't know," she murmured. "I didn't know she'd be there that day. I never wanted." "This isn't your responsibility," he cut in. "It's mine." "But I was part of it," Lena said, her voice cracking despite her efforts to steady it. "And I need to know what happens now. To us." Us. The word rang through the room like a question he was ill-equipped to answer. He looked away, out the window, at the skyline that had once felt like a promise and now felt like accusation. "I don't know," he admitted. She absorbed this with a painful stillness. "You said you felt suffocated," she whispered, "that she didn't understand you anymore, that you were drowning." He winced. Those had been his words, spoken in weakness, in late-night conversations where honesty had blurred with self-pity. Lena's face crumpled. "Were those lies?" "No," he said too quickly. Then, quieter. "Not entirely, but they weren't the whole truth either." "What's the whole truth?" "That I was overwhelmed, that I was losing control of everything, my schedule, my fund, myself. And instead of dealing with any of it, I looked for distraction." Distraction. The word hit her like impact. She stepped back as if struck. "So I wasn't something real," she whispered. "Just escape." "Lena, don't." "It's okay." She lifted a hand, stopping him. "I just needed to know which story was true." Her gaze flicked to his wedding ring, still on his finger. She nodded once,
a small act of acceptance, then opened the door and left. It was not a dramatic exit, no slammed door, no tearful accusations. But something essential collapsed in her absence. Ethan sat alone, the quiet in the office suddenly suffocating. The third aftershock came from his mother. Patricia Cole arrived unannounced at the private club where he was staying, a place he had chosen precisely because it allowed him to disappear behind mahogany walls and polished floors. She strode into the lounge with the force of a woman who had weathered life's tempests and refused to be cowed by any of them. Heads turned. She ignored them. "Stand up," she said. He stood. She examined him the way a general inspects a soldier who has disgraced his unit. "Is it true?" He swallowed. "Yes." She closed her eyes just for a moment. When she opened them, they glittered with cold anger. "Your wife," she said, each word crisp as breaking glass, "is the best part of you." "I know." "No," she snapped. "You don't know. If you knew, you wouldn't have thrown her away for someone who won't survive a single winter of your ambition." Ethan flinched. His mother's voice softened, not in forgiveness, but in grief. "I raised you better than this, Ethan. I raised you to keep your vows, not to chase every fleeting comfort. And now you've humiliated not only her, but yourself." He sank into a chair, head in his hands. "I made a mistake." "Mistakes are burned food or bad investments," she replied. "This was a choice." A choice. The word struck deeper than any accusation from colleagues or investors. His mother stood over him, arms crossed. "You will cooperate in this divorce," she said. "You will not attack her character. You will not diminish what she built with you. And you will accept the consequences like a man." Her voice shook, not with fear, but with disappointment so profound it stole his breath. Then she left him there, alone with nothing but his guilt. The fourth aftershock arrived in the form of a headline. A journalist covering Atlanta's emerging design scene published a feature praising Amara and Naomi's firm for their contributions to sustainable urban infrastructure. The article included a brief, tactful mention of Amara's private hardship, praising her continued excellence in the face of personal upheaval. The next day, Ethan received a terse email from an investor. "If your wife can handle adversity with grace and professionalism, I trust you will do the same. We expect stability from our partners." Another wrote, "If internal drama threatens fund performance, we will review our position." He deleted the emails, but the shame lingered in his chest like a bruise. Late that night, in his temporary club room, Ethan sat alone on the bed he hadn't slept well in since the night he left the loft. The city glowed beyond the window, indifferent to the turmoil inside him. He thought of Amara, her certainty, her calm fury, the way she had looked at him like a man who'd taken something precious and pretended it was disposable. He thought of Lena, her hurt, her confusion, the way he had allowed her to believe in something he never had the right to offer. He thought of himself and found the reflection unbearable. For the first time since the affair began, Ethan truly understood the scope of what he had done. Not just breaking vows, not just betraying a woman who had loved him, but dismantling the story he told the world about who he was. A visionary, a leader, a man who built the future. Now he was something smaller. A man defined not by his ambition, but by the cracks forming in the life he'd taken for granted. Outside, a train rumbled in the distance. Inside, Ethan Cole felt the weight of the collapse he had engineered, and knew, with hollow certainty, that there was no version of this story in which he emerged unscathed. Mediation was held in a midtown tower with floors that smelled faintly of lemon polish and generational wealth. The sort of place that assumed civility simply because everything was wrapped in glass and brushed steel. Amara arrived precisely on time, her posture straight, her hair pulled into a low, deliberate knot that revealed every angle of her face. She wore a navy suit that didn't shout power, but carried it quietly, the way a well-designed structure stands firm without fanfare. Veronica walked beside her like a general entering a negotiation tent, calm and sharpened. They were led to a conference room lined with framed photographs of Atlanta's skyline. The very city both Amara and Ethan had tried to help reshape, now reduced to wall decoration in the backdrop of their unraveling. Ethan was already seated. For a moment, Amara felt the ghost of a memory flicker. Him looking up from a cafe table, smiling when she walked in, making room for her coat, lifting her hand to kiss it as if he couldn't believe she was real. But the man in front of her now was different, exhausted, guarded, his gaze shadowed by the consequences he hadn't anticipated. "Good morning," he said, voice strained with an attempt at normalcy. "Morning," she answered, her tone neutral. It wasn't cold, it was finished. The mediator, a composed woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like a steady metronome, began with pleasantries that did nothing to soften the tension in the room. Coffee was poured. Folders were opened. Everyone pretended this was a procedural puzzle rather than a dissection. Then Ethan's attorney slid a packet across the table. "This is our offer." Veronica lifted it, skimmed the first page, and set it back down with the delicacy of someone handling something mildly offensive. "Amara," she murmured, "don't waste a second of emotion on this." But Amara's eyes flickered to the numbers anyway. The offer was shockingly low, far below any reasonable recognition of their shared assets, her contributions, or the growth his fund had enjoyed during the years she had supported him. More nauseating still was the final page. A non-disclosure agreement so broad and severe, it essentially demanded her silence about the marriage, the affair, the divorce, and anything that might reflect badly on him. Her throat tightened. "This is insulting," she said quietly. Ethan winced. "It's a starting point." "No," Amara replied, voice steady as reinforced steel. "It's an erasure." Veronica folded her hands. "We decline this offer in its entirety. And if this is representative of your posture, we can adjourn today and proceed directly to court." Ethan's lawyer cleared his throat. "Let's not escalate prematurely. Mr. Cole believes this arrangement is more than fair, given that most of his wealth was accrued independently." Veronica gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Independently? Your client expanded his fund during a marriage where my client hosted the dinners, built the home, and made professional sacrifices for his travel schedule. If he thinks he built that future alone, he's delusional." Ethan stiffened. "That's not what I said." "It's what you offered," Amara murmured, something fractured in his expression. Not anger, but shame. Brief, fleeting, then hidden beneath strategy. "We're willing to discuss revisions," his attorney said quickly. "Let's break into separate rooms." In the smaller room, Amara sat beside Veronica, the city unfolding outside the window in a quilt of shimmering streets. She attempted to breathe, slow and deep, but fury thrummed beneath her skin like electricity. "He wants to buy my silence," she said. "He wants to manage optics," Veronica corrected. "Rich men don't fear divorce. They fear narrative." Amara folded her arms. "He didn't just betray me. He used our marriage to build credibility. Investors trusted him because he seemed stable, ethical, grounded, and now he wants to pretend I was incidental. That," Veronica said, "is why we are not taking his offer." Before Amara could respond, the door opened. The mediator stepped in, clasping a tablet. "Mr. Cole has agreed to revise the offer," the mediator said. "He's open to increasing the financial portion slightly, though he insists the NDA remains essential to both parties' reputations." Amara inhaled sharply. "My reputation isn't the one that needs protecting." The mediator hesitated. "He believes that public discussion could harm both of your professional standings." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "There it is." "What?" Amara asked. "The second betrayal," her lawyer said softly. "He's trying to rewrite the narrative so you appear equally culpable, as if the marriage simply failed, rather than being detonated by his actions." The words landed in Amara's chest with a heavy finality. She had survived the first betrayal. The body, the bed, the lies whispered in the space she'd once called sanctuary. But this?
This was the betrayal of truth, the quiet attempt to revise history so that her pain became a footnote rather than evidence. She felt the heat rising under her skin, not wild or explosive, but molten, controlled, like lava traveling beneath the earth, remaking it from below. "No," Amara said. "Absolutely not." Her voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. Veronica nodded. "We counter with a real number, and no gag order." "What number?" the mediator asked. "The one that reflects reality," Veronica replied. 50% of shared assets plus a valuation of the business growth during the marriage. We're filing for full discovery if they refuse." The mediator left. Amara stared at the table, fingers curled around each other until the knuckles whitened. "I knew he'd lie about the affair. I knew he'd minimize it. But this, trying to mute me, it feels worse." "Because it is," Veronica said gently. "Cheating breaks love. Silencing breaks dignity." Amara's breath wavered, but she didn't crumble. Not this time. Instead, something inside her solidified. Something sharper than sorrow, sturdier than rage. She was done being collateral damage in a story Ethan wanted to sanitize. She was done being the silent foundation upon which he built an empire. She would not give him the courtesy of her silence. When they returned to the conference room, Ethan looked up, searching her expression for softness or compromise. But the woman who entered was not the grieving wife who had collapsed on the loft floor. She was composed, lucid, unyielding, a structural engineer who had assessed the fractures and decided the building was no longer salvageable. "Amara," he murmured, voice strained, "we don't have to do this in a hostile way." She sat down, met his gaze, held it with the steadiness of steel girders. "I'm not hostile," she said. "I'm clear." And for the first time, Ethan realized clarity was far more dangerous. The courthouse loomed over downtown Atlanta with the solemn gravity of a place built to witness the worst in people. Its marble steps had been worn smooth by decades of heartbreak, greed, grief, and, occasionally, justice. As Amara climbed those steps, the morning air surprisingly cool for late spring, she felt none of the trembling she had expected. She felt steady. Too steady, perhaps. The kind of steadiness that comes right before impact. Inside, the courtroom hummed with a quiet tension. Oak panels lined the walls, polished to a sheen that reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. Attorneys whispered to one another. Paper shuffled. A bailiff adjusted his tie with the self-importance of someone who believed himself the guardian of order. Amara took her seat beside Veronica Hayes, whose presence was a fortress. Ethan sat across the aisle with his legal team, 3 men in tailored suits, their expressions carefully arranged into professional neutrality. He looked smaller than she remembered. Still handsome, still composed, but thinned somehow, as though the last months had scraped away something essential. He didn't look at her at first. When he finally did, the glance was quick, almost apologetic. But apology was a currency with no value here. The judge entered, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and a posture that implied she could see through any performance. Everyone rose. Everyone sat. And just like that, the deconstruction of a marriage became a matter of public record. The first day belonged to financials. Spreadsheets projected onto a large screen illuminated the courtroom with cold blue light. Growth curves, asset breakdowns, statements showing travel that did not match work calendars, charges from hotels Amara didn't recognize, a purchase at an upscale boutique whose lingerie never found its way into her drawers. Veronica presented each piece with surgical precision. This charge occurred on March 18th. According to Mr. Cole's calendar, he was in Houston for business. But his flight logs show he never left Atlanta that weekend. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Here," Veronica continued, tapping a highlighted line, "is a $1,200 dinner at La Mer. Mr. Cole told my client he was attending a board meeting that night." She paused, letting the silence fill the room. He was not at a board meeting. Each revelation was a blow, not to Amara, who had already bled these truths in private, but to Ethan,
who seemed unprepared for how stark betrayal looked when stripped of excuses and presented as data. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't flinch. They didn't shrink from the truth. Day 2 was emotional testimony. Amara had dreaded this part, not because she feared speaking, but because she feared remembering. She had spent months learning how to hold herself together. Now she had to unravel that in front of strangers. When Veronica called her to the stand, Amara inhaled slowly, walked forward, and swore to tell the truth. The oath felt heavier than she expected. "How would you describe the early years of your marriage?" Veronica asked. Amara folded her hands. "Loving, supportive, collaborative. We built a home together. We built dreams together." "And when did you first notice a change?" She hesitated. "About a year before I discovered the affair. Ethan became distant, distracted. I assumed it was stress." "And did you support him through that stress?" "Yes," Amara said. "I rearranged work trips, hosted dinners for investors, created space for him to decompress. I believed we were partners." "And did you feel your contributions were recognized?" A pause. Not at the end. She spoke calmly, but each sentence felt like a tiny fracture in the air. She described the loneliness of waiting in a home she had designed, the night she came back early, the sound behind the bedroom door. Her voice did not break, but the courtroom grew unnervingly silent. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. "That night," Amara said, "I realized I had been faithful to a marriage that no longer existed. And I realized I was the only one holding it up." Veronica let the statement settle like dust after demolition. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan's attorney rose for cross-examination. "Miss Johnson," he began smoothly, "would you say your career became more demanding in the final year of your marriage?" Amara met his gaze. "Yes, but Ethan's did too." "And would you agree that long work hours can create emotional distance?" "Yes," she said, "but distance doesn't create infidelity. Choices do." A tiny gasp came from someone in the back. Ethan's lawyers shifted, but the damage was done. No further question could dilute that clarity. On the third day, Ethan took the stand. His voice, usually steady, faltered. He tried to frame his choices as the product of pressure, of feeling overwhelmed, of losing himself. He spoke of loneliness, of emotional disconnect, of mistakes. Veronica rose, her steps measured, her expression cool enough to quiet a room. "Mr. Cole," she said, "did your wife ever refuse to support you?" "No." "Did she ever deny you time, space, or partnership?" "No." "Did she ever betray your trust?" "No." Veronica folded her hands behind her back. "So the distance you describe, was it created by her actions or by your choices?" Ethan closed his eyes. When he opened them, the truth sat there, heavy as a stone. "My choices." One of the jurors, an older woman with tired eyes, nodded almost imperceptibly, as if she had known this truth long before he spoke it. Veronica continued. "And during these choices, you used marital assets to further your affair. Did you not?" Ethan's shoulders sagged. "Yes." "Thank you," Veronica said, her voice neither cruel nor triumphant. No further questions. By afternoon, Amara felt hollow. Testimony had rinsed her of something she couldn't name, part dignity, part sorrow, part exhaustion. She had come into the courthouse with grief shaped like a bruise. Now it felt like excavation, deep, painful, revealing. During a short recess, she stood by the window overlooking the street below. People passed in clusters, lawyers rushing to hearings, parents herding children, professionals on lunch breaks. Life, indifferent and persistent, moved on. A reflection appeared beside hers. Ethan, standing just behind her, as he had stood countless mornings before coffee, before betrayal, before everything. "Amara," he said quietly, "I never wanted to hurt you like this." She didn't turn. "But you did. I know, and I'm sorry." She closed her eyes, not because the words moved her, but because they no longer did. She finally looked at him. "Ethan, if you had apologized months ago, if you had fought for us instead of hiding behind excuses, Maybe things would have been different, but you didn't, and I can't carry both of us anymore. The weight of that truth settled between them. He nodded, defeated. I understand. For the first time, she believed him. When court reconvened, the final arguments were delivered. Veronica presented a compelling case that recognized Amara's material and emotional contributions. Ethan's lawyers attempted to minimize damages, citing his fund's premarital origins. But the judge's gaze made clear she had little patience for narratives that obscured responsibility. As the gavel struck to end the session, Amara felt a thin crack widen inside her. Not breaking, but releasing. Some final tether snapping free. A weight she hadn't realized she'd been dragging finally dissolved. She wasn't triumphant. She wasn't shattered. She was simply done. And in that strange, quiet ending, something like the earliest hint of freedom brushed against her skin. Light as breath, fragile as first light breaking through a storm. The breaking point had passed. What came next would be the rebuilding. The decision arrived on a Wednesday morning, wrapped not in drama, but in paperwork. A clerk called Veronica's office with the kind of practiced neutrality that suggested she delivered life-altering news daily between coffee breaks. The written judgment was ready. They could pick it up at noon. "Come in," Veronica had said over the phone. "You should read it here." So Amara found herself again in that glass-walled conference room, the city spread beneath her in steel and asphalt. The same table, the same carafe of water, the same file folder, only this time it held the end of a chapter rather than the map of a battle. Veronica entered with the document in hand, her expression unreadable. "Is it bad?" Amara asked, surprised by the rasp in her own voice. "If it were bad," Veronica said, taking her seat, "I would have brought wine." She slid the packet across the table. The judge was thorough. Amara's fingers hovered over the pages for a heartbeat before she finally began to read. It was not written as a love story or a tragedy. It was written in the language of law, measured, careful, precise. But beneath the neutrality, Amara felt something else. A quiet, unexpected compassion. The court recognized the marriage as a partnership. It acknowledged her unpaid labor, the investor dinners she'd planned, the travel she'd deferred, the stability she'd maintained while Ethan pursued growth. It condemned the use of marital funds to support an affair. It detailed, in calm, unequivocal paragraphs, the ways Ethan's choices had shifted the balance of equity. And then came the numbers. She inhaled, steady. The settlement was fair, more than fair, given how often women walked away with far less than they deserved. A defined share of the home's equity, a portion of the fund's growth during the marriage, enough for her to build something new that didn't begin with fear. But it was the final section that undid her. The judge's written observations. The evidence demonstrates that Ms. Johnson approached this marriage with good faith, loyalty, and significant personal sacrifice. Her contributions, though frequently indirect, were foundational to the success enjoyed during the years in question. Mr. Cole's sustained infidelity and misuse of joint resources constitute a breach of that partnership, which this court finds deeply troubling. Amara stopped reading. The words blurred, not because they were harsh, but because they were kind in a way she hadn't expected from ink and paper. For months, her mind had looped around the same cruel refrains. How did I miss it? Was I selfish? Was I too focused on work? Too much? Not enough? Now, in black and white, someone with no personal stake in her story had written a different verdict. Not failed wife, not negligent partner, just loyal, significant, wronged. Her chest tightened. She hadn't cried in weeks. Not really. Some tears here and there, quiet and controlled, but nothing like those first days on the loft floor. She had kept herself moving, upright, busy, too busy to fall apart. Now her body realized it had run out of distance to outrun the impact. "Amara," Veronica said softly, "you won." The word echoed strangely in the room. Won. Amara set the document down with trembling hands. For a moment she sat very still. Then the tears came, soundless at first, then with low, shuddering sobs that bent her forward, one hand covering her mouth, as if she could catch the pieces of herself spilling out. Veronica did not shush her, did not rush to stop it. She simply slid a box of tissues closer and waited, gaze turned tactfully toward the window. "I didn't want to win," Amara whispered eventually, voice raw. "I wanted a marriage." "I know," Veronica said. "But since that wasn't possible, this is the closest thing to justice the system can offer." "It feels so small," Amara choked, "compared to what I lost." "Of course it does," Veronica murmured. "Money doesn't mend trust. Recognition doesn't erase nights alone. Court orders don't hold you when you can't sleep. But this," she nodded toward the judgment, "gives you ground to stand on while you rebuild the rest." Amara pressed the heels of her palms to her eyes, breathing hard. "I thought when this was over I'd feel lighter," she admitted. "Free, maybe. Instead, I just feel tired, so tired." "That," Veronica said gently, "is because you've been surviving a disaster in real time. After the storm, there is always a collapse. Not of you," she added quickly, seeing panic flicker across Amara's face. "Of the adrenaline that's been carrying you." "And then what?" Amara asked, her voice a frayed thread. "Then," Veronica said, "you let people help you lift what's left." The collapse came later that week. It arrived not in court, not in her office, but in the quiet of her own loft. The space that had once been a shared dream and was now a monument to everything she tried to hold together. She had forwarded the judgment to her accountant. She had texted Naomi a simple, "It's done." She had spoken to her mother, who thanked God aloud in a mix of anger and relief. She had returned to her desk, answered emails, corrected drawings, reviewed site photos. By the time she got home, it was dark. She set her bag down by the door. The loft greeted her with its familiar expanse, the high ceilings she'd once loved, the staircase she designed, the kitchen island where so many meals had been prepared with laughter, with tenderness, with the illusion of forever. Tonight, it all felt too big, too full of ghosts. She didn't turn on the main lights. The city glow seeped through the tall windows, painting the space in soft grays. She walked to the center of the living room and turned slowly, as if inspecting a structure after an earthquake, checking for damage. There was none you could see. The beams still held. The walls still stood. Everything she'd built was intact. She was the one who wasn't. A sound escaped her then, somewhere between a sob and a sigh. She sank down onto the floor, the concrete cool against her palms. Memories crowded in, uninvited and merciless. Ethan carrying the mattress up the stairs, his hands at her waist as they danced in their socks. The way he had once looked at her like she was both anchor and horizon. The judgment had put words to his failure. It had not taught her what to do with the parts of herself still wired to the man he had been before he broke everything. "I'm so tired," she whispered into the empty room. The emptiness did not answer. Her phone vibrated beside her. She ignored it. It vibrated again and again. Finally, with a groan, she reached for it, expecting another well-meaning message she didn't have the strength to respond to. Instead, she saw Naomi's name in 3 simple words: therapist, tomorrow, 2 p.m. A link followed. An address. A note. She's excellent. And black. And not here to fix you, just to hold the pieces while you decide what to do with them. Amara stared at the screen through blurred vision. Therapy had always been something for other people. People with time. People who hadn't been taught to endure and outwork their pain. In her family, you prayed, you persevered, you pushed through. You did not sit in a room and unpack your heart with a stranger. But the judgment, for all its clarity, had not told her what to do with the ache. And so the next afternoon, she found herself in a softly lit office, sitting on a couch that did not try to swallow her, opposite a woman with kind, steady eyes and locks pulled into a crown. "I'm Dr. Monroe," the woman said. "You can call me Sade." "Amara," she replied. "I know," Sade said with a small smile. "I've read the intake notes.
But I'd prefer to hear your story from you, not from a file.
Amara almost laughed.
The word story felt too gentle for the wreckage she carried. I don't even know where to start, she said. Then start where it hurts most, Sade replied. We can trace back from there. The invitation was terrifying. It was also, she realized, a kind of grace.
So Amara took a breath.
And for the second time in her life, after the oath in court, but this time on her own terms, she began to tell the truth, not for judges or lawyers or gossiping acquaintances, but for herself. As she spoke, something subtle shifted inside her. The judgment had given her legal closure. This room, this quiet, might someday give her emotional freedom. But first, there would be collapse. There would be grief. There would be nights where she questioned every choice that had led her here. And then, slowly, there would be rebuilding, on foundations chosen by her alone. Summer crept into Atlanta with slow, honey-thick heat, the kind that made the air shimmer over asphalt and coaxed magnolia blossoms into opening. Amara stepped into it as if stepping into the next version of her life, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty, like someone relearning how to trust the ground under her feet. The judgment was behind her. The loft, though still hers for now, no longer felt like a battlefield. Therapy had become less about triage and more about excavation, brushing the dust from old beliefs, re-examining the architecture of her identity, choosing what to keep and what to dismantle. But the real transformation began, unexpectedly, at work. One Monday morning, Amara walked into the office to find Naomi perched on the edge of her desk, clutching 2 lattes and grinning like someone holding a delicious secret. What? Amara asked, setting down her bag. You, Naomi said, handing her a latte, have been invited to keynote the Southeastern Sustainable Cities Summit. Amara froze. Keynote? That's not possible. I submitted a panel proposal. They read your proposal, Naomi replied, and decided you're too good for a panel. Amara stared at the email Naomi forwarded, the official letterhead crisp and unmistakable. Her name, Amara L. Johnson, P.E., appeared under the title Keynote Speaker. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she murmured. Naomi tilted her head. You walked into a courtroom and dismantled a man's entire narrative with 3 sentences. I'm pretty sure you can stand on a stage. Amara laughed, really laughed, the sound bubbling up unexpectedly. It felt fragile and brave at once. The weeks that followed unfolded with a momentum she hadn't anticipated. Her firm landed a commission to design a climate-resilient community hub on the west side, an ambitious project combining renewable energy, flood-resistant building strategies, and dedicated spaces for neighborhood gatherings. It was the kind of work that lit up every part of her mind. On early site visits, she stood beneath the sun, watching excavators break ground, the scent of churned earth rising around her. She sketched structural concepts in the margins of her notebook. She talked with residents about what safety meant to them, not just surviving storms, but surviving a system that had always flooded them first and rebuilt them last. The project felt like healing in motion, concrete, literal, communal. At night she went home exhausted in the best way, body humming, brain alive. Sometimes she cooked simple meals. Sometimes she ate standing at the counter. Sometimes she worked late. Drawings spread across the kitchen island Ethan had once claimed was his favorite place in the house. Now, it was simply hers. And each time she looked at the lines she drew, curved, angular, tensile, tender, she felt something soft unfolding inside her chest. Something she had not dared to name for months. Hope. By late July, she began searching for a new home. Her therapist had suggested it gently. Healing sometimes requires new architecture. Amara knew she couldn't stay in the loft forever. It was a beautiful space, and she had built it with love, but love had left its fingerprints on too many corners. So she walked through neighborhoods with a real estate agent who knew better than to make small talk. She toured mid-century bungalows and sleek townhouses. Nothing felt right, until she stepped into a narrow street in Inman Park and saw a compact, sunlit duplex with ivy crawling up its brick facade. It was imperfect. The kitchen was outdated, the upstairs hallway cramped, the hardwood floors scuffed with age. But the windows, oh, the windows, flooded the rooms with morning gold, and the backyard held just enough space for a small garden and a bench. Amara stepped inside and exhaled. "This," she whispered, "could be mine." She bought it within the month. Moving day was a gentle riot of cardboard and laughter. Derek assembled furniture with exaggerated groans. Her mother blessed every doorway with quiet prayers. Naomi stocked the fridge with sparkling water and imported chocolates, because hydration and indulgence are both forms of self-care. As the sun set, casting soft stripes of light across the living room, Amara stood in the center of the space and turned slowly. It wasn't grand. It wasn't polished. It wasn't the vision she'd once had of coupledom and domestic perfection. But it was hers, her own first true home. A foundation built not with shared dreams, but with resilience. In early September, she delivered her keynote. The auditorium was enormous. Tiered rows, glass walls, a sea of eyes watching her. She had rehearsed, but when she stepped onto the stage, her notes felt unnecessary. The lights softened, and the room held a breath. She spoke not just of engineering, but of equity, of designing cities that did not simply withstand storms, but honored the people living in their path. She spoke of foundations, literal and metaphorical, of how structures fail when their load-bearing members are neglected, and how marriages fail in much the same way. Not naming Ethan, not needing to. Her story was now about something larger. The audience rose to their feet before she finished her final sentence. Applause washed over her like a tide, warm, affirming, endless. Backstage, Naomi embraced her. "You didn't just nail it," she said. "You shifted the room." For once, Amara didn't argue. She felt the truth of it. She felt the ground beneath her feet holding steady, strong. The true independence arrived quietly. One evening in October, she sat in her new backyard, surrounded by the scent of fresh soil. Her hands were dirty, her knees sore, and a mug of warm tea steamed beside her. She watched the sky turn amber, then lilac, then deep indigo. She wasn't thinking about Ethan, not about Lena, not about the courtroom or the night of discovery or the life she had lost. She was thinking about the raised garden bed she just built, about the community hub nearing completion, about the students she would soon mentor at Georgia Tech, about the version of herself she was becoming, one unbound by betrayal, one defined by strength, creativity, and a fierce devotion to rebuilding not just buildings, but lives. Her life. For the first time in nearly a year, she felt whole. Not healed, healing. Not finished, becoming. A foundation laid not by accidents or partnerships or pain, but by her own hands, steady, capable, unshaken. And as fireflies threaded through the twilight, Amara whispered into the gathering dark. This is just the beginning. New York in November had always felt like a city rehearsing winter. Wind slicing between buildings, leaves skittering across wet pavement, steam rising from subway grates like the breath of something ancient beneath the streets. Amara stepped out of the conference center and wrapped her scarf more tightly around her neck, the chill settling over her skin with a strangely invigorating bite. She had just finished her panel on resilient architecture, a spirited discussion that left her exhilarated and mentally buzzing. In the lobby, students had clustered around her, asking questions, snapping photos of her sketches, jotting down quotes. A few years ago, she'd been the one scribbling notes in the margins of her notebook, hoping someone would see her work. Now, people knew her, listened to her, learned from her. She moved toward the exit, the hum of conversations blending with the rattle of revolving doors. And then she saw him. Ethan stood near the coffee kiosk, speaking with a colleague, hands tucked into the pockets of a wool coat she didn't recognize. His hair was shorter, his face a little thinner, a faint tiredness etched around his eyes. He lifted his head at the exact moment she did, as though some invisible thread tugged both their gazes upward. For a heartbeat, the world thinned. Noise muted. Light sharpened. The air between them stretched into one of those strange temporal pockets where memory and present collide, where time folds neatly over itself. Ethan blinked, startled. His colleague followed his line of sight. "Amara," Ethan said, stepping forward. She considered walking past him, letting this moment dissolve into anonymity. But she stopped, not out of lingering affection or anger, but because there was no fear left in her. No ache, no trembling, just clarity. "Hello, Ethan," she said. Her voice was warm enough to be civil, cool enough to be final. He took her in slowly, openly, with a softness that bordered on regret. "You look, well." "I am," she answered simply. A pause, a breath. "How have you been?" he asked, as if they were two old acquaintances making small talk in the cereal aisle. "I've been good," she said. "Busy. Growing." Her smile was polite, unburdened. She was not performing composure. She was living it. Ethan nodded, eyes flickering with something she couldn't name. Sadness, maybe. Or recognition. Or the quiet realization that the woman before him was not the woman who had once knelt on their loft floor, shattered. "I'm glad," he said softly. She believed him. But his gladness meant nothing to her journey now. "And you?" she asked out of courtesy. He hesitated. "Managing. It's been a difficult year." There it was, the truth without embellishment. A man who was no longer pretending the consequences hadn't found him. She nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, not sympathy. "Well," she said gently, "I hope you continue moving forward." He swallowed. "Take care, Amara." "You too." And that was it. He stepped aside. She walked past him, not with triumph, but with peace. A quiet, grounded peace that came from knowing she owed him nothing. Not her bitterness, not her forgiveness, not her narrative. Her life had expanded beyond the borders of his shadow. She hadn't realized until that moment how free she truly was. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the plaza. She pulled her coat tighter and headed toward the taxi line. Halfway there, a voice called after her. "Miss Johnson?" Amara turned to see a woman striding toward her with purposeful steps. Sharp bob haircut, tailored coat, the kind of presence that made people instinctively step out of her way. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the woman said, extending a hand. "I'm Celeste Vaughn, founder of Vaughn Urban Futures." Amara shook her hand. The name was familiar, whispers in professional circles, articles profiling her as one of the leading investors in equitable development on the East Coast. "I attended your panel," Celeste said, her eyes bright with interest. "Your framing of resilience as a communal asset rather than an engineering challenge was refreshing, rare, frankly, overdue." Amara felt a smile tug at her lips. "Thank you. That means a lot." "I'm not finished with the compliment," Celeste said lightly. "I've been following your firm's work for years, but today was the first time I saw how clearly your vision extends beyond steel and soil calculations." Amara blinked, taken aback. "I'd like to talk to you about a project," Celeste continued. "A major one." They stepped aside, near the glass facade of the conference center, where reflections of the city shimmered like shifting blueprints. "I'm funding a women's innovation and renewal center," Celeste said, "in East Atlanta, a space for entrepreneurs, survivors of major life transitions, women rebuilding careers, families, selves, incubators, co-working studios, mentorship programs. But I don't just want a building. I want a symbol, a structure that breathes resilience." Amara's heart stirred. "We've been searching for the right architect for months," Celeste said. "Every proposal has been technically sound, but creatively hollow. You, on the other hand," she paused, studying Amara with an uncanny perceptiveness. "You understand what it means to rebuild from nothing. You understand transformation, both structural and personal." Something warm beneath Amara's ribs, blooming slowly. "I'd like you to lead the design," Celeste said. "Completely. No restrictions, No templates, no committees watering down your concepts. Build what only you can build. Amara inhaled sharply, the cold air filling her chest with a familiar, exhilarating ache. The ache of possibility. It was as if the universe had taken the rubble of her past and turned it into an open door. "Would you be interested?" Celeste asked. Amara didn't answer right away. She looked up at the city, its glinting windows, its rumbling heart, its persistent movement forward. Then she looked back at Celeste. "I'm interested," she said softly. "Show me what's possible." Celeste smiled. "Sure, satisfied, certain. Welcome to the next chapter, Miss Johnson." As Amara stepped into her taxi, the city lights reflected in the glass like constellations. She realized her encounter with Ethan hadn't been a twist of the knife. It had been closure, delivered in the quiet, understated way real closure often arrives. Her future no longer curved around him. It curved toward something greater, toward creation, toward legacy, toward the woman she had fought, through fire, ruin, and her own breaking, to become. As the taxi pulled into the night, Amara watched New York blur into trails of gold and silver and thought, some circles don't close to trap you. They close to show you how far you've traveled. The morning sun rose soft and golden over East Atlanta, casting warm light across the sleek curves and glass contours of the Women's Innovation and Renewal Center. The building stood like a hymn to resilience, alive with intention, glowing with possibility. It was everything Amara had imagined on that New York evening, and somehow, impossibly, more. She arrived before the crowds, her heels clicking against the new pavement, each sound echoing lightly through the open courtyard she had designed to feel like an embrace. Plants rustled in the breeze. Solar panels shimmered atop the roof like a quiet promise. Inside, hallways wrapped around light wells where community gardens flourished beneath skylights. Every detail reflected the journey she had traveled, through storms, through silence, through rebuilding. Naomi found her standing at the threshold. "They're already setting up," her friend said, smoothing her blazer. "Are you ready?" Amara inhaled deeply. "Yes, I think I've been ready for this longer than I realized." Together they walked into the main atrium, where the glass wall framed a mural painted by local artists, women of all ages, all shades, all stories, rising from swirling lines of color that resembled wind and water and flame. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Resilience is not the absence of breakage. It is the art of rebuilding with new strength." Amara ran her fingertips over the metal, a soft smile forming. Sade, her therapist, arrived next, enveloping her in a warm hug. Then her mother, radiant in a lavender suit. Derek, pretending not to tear up, but failing spectacularly. Colleagues, students, neighbors, one by one they filled the space until the building felt truly alive. The final ribbon was tied across the entrance. When Amara stepped up to the podium, the applause began. A rising wave, not loud or wild, but deep, genuine, the kind that reached inside her chest and filled the empty places she once thought would never heal. She opened her speech with steady hands. "When I began designing this center," she said, her voice resonant in the atrium, "I understood buildings. I understood strength. I understood the math of bearing loads and resisting storms." She glanced at the faces before her, women who had survived their own implosions, their own rebuildings. "What I didn't understand," she continued, "was that I was designing not just a structure, but myself." Soft murmurs rippled through the crowd. "This center is more than steel and glass," she said. "It's a promise. A place where women, no matter what they've endured, can rediscover their strength, reclaim their dignity, and rise without apology." Her mother dabbed her eyes. Naomi squeezed her arm. Someone in the front row whispered, "Amen." Amara lifted the scissors. "To new beginnings," she said, and cut the ribbon. The room erupted. Cheers, laughter, tears, joy. As she stepped aside, letting the first women enter the building she had poured her soul into, she felt it, the quiet, profound click of a chapter closing fully and cleanly. She had not won by defeating Ethan. She had won by becoming someone he could never diminish. Outside, a light rain began to fall, a blessing more than a storm. Amara tilted her face upward, letting the cool drops kiss her skin. The world felt wide again. And if you've walked with Amara through her journey, through betrayal, battle, rebuilding, and triumph, thank you for being part of this story. If her rise moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in your own strength, like, comment, and follow the channel for more beautifully crafted tales of resilience and transformation. This is not the end. It's simply the beginning of another extraordinary story.